Alrighty. Well, again, thanks for your time today. It's really great to have a chance to talk with you. My name's Tom Merrill. I'm a travel consultant, I guess is my title, with Bob Rogers Travel. And this is a presentation that I've done with several music ed groups. And in fact, you're getting kind of an extended version of a presentation I'm doing at Midwest this coming December. That's basically the same title, Making the Where Match Your Why. And it kind of gets into performance travel philosophy. And one of the reasons I like to talk to college groups about this is, because right now you're probably sitting there thinking, I've got so much other stuff going on. I'm getting ready for a recital. I'm getting ready for student teaching, whatever it might be. When you think of it, I'm guessing most of you probably traveled when you were in your high school ensemble. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yeah.
So when you think about it, you're the closest you will ever be to that experience right now than you ever will be again. And it's a great time for you to kind of reflect on your experiences as a student and how that shaped where you're at, and have that kind of thing in mind as you get into your career and you delve deeper into, now I'm going to do this for my own groups. So, and we'll kind of touch on that here too. In fact, why don't we go ahead and let's just get started. So, the first question probably in your mind is, besides the fact that I work for a travel company, what is it? Why am I here? What have I got to bring to the table? So, the first thing is that I actually spent 10 years teaching as a high school band director and traveled with my ensembles. I taught for a while in Iowa and Colorado, settled back here in Illinois, where my wife is originally from the Chicago area, and we live up in Lake Villa up by Wisconsin right now. But I spent 10 years doing what it is you're preparing to do right now. Since that time, I've spent the past 22 years in the professional student travel industry as a travel planner and a festival and event planner. I've worked for two different travel companies. I'm currently with Bob Rogers Travel. I was with another Chicago-based company for quite a few years. I also worked for a company that does Carnegie Hall choir events. So if you ever see where multiple choirs get together and they perform with a guest conductor at somewhere like Carnegie Hall, that was what that company did. Then I also worked for the Festivals of Music and Music in the Parks company, which, if you're familiar with them, and some of you may have gone to some of their events, they do competitive music festivals all around the country through the spring months, a lot of them attached to theme parks, that type of thing. So what I bring to this is having that experience both as a band director who traveled with his groups, as a travel planner who designs the itineraries and does that sort of thing. That's what I do right now. And someone who plans musical events that go into those itineraries. So I've seen the industry and I've seen the activity from kind of different vantage points. That gives me a little bit of a nice overview of how to make things work in that. And one thing I do want to say as an aside is I'm still an active musician. I play in an adult concert band up here in the north suburbs. I sing in my church choir. In fact, I was doing that just this morning. And the reason I do that, when I graduated from undergrad, and if you take anything else away today, I'd want it to be this. When I graduated from college, I made myself a promise that I was going to keep performing. I wanted to, keep playing my clarinet. I wanted to keep singing in choirs, that type of thing, for a couple of reasons. Number one, I felt that would help me be a better teacher because it kept me on the other side of that podium where, I don't forget what it's like to be sitting in the chairs in the rows, standing on the choir risers, that type of thing. And I feel like it did do that. It really did help me when I was teaching. And the other real reason too is, if nothing else, it got me out of the house one night a week, after spending all my time with kids, and I could go be with grownups, and I could remember what it was about music that helped me fall in love with it and decide to make it my vocation. So my encouragement to you, again, if you take away anything else from this today, is that you make sure when you get out in the real world, find an ensemble, find a civic orchestra, find a local concert band, a summer band, church choir, professional choir, whatever it might be, and keep doing what it is that got you to this point, because you won't regret it, I guarantee. It's actually a promise I've kept for those 32 years since my undergrad graduation. So definitely make sure you do that. But let's talk about what the start was for me, and it's probably a lot like what you experienced. So when I was 16 years old, what was about to happen was going to be the most exciting thing that I'd ever done in my life. My high school band, little school in Iowa, had just been selected to represent the state of Iowa in the National Independence Day Parade in Washington, D.C. Now, being a small town band kid, I'd never been anywhere much bigger than Minneapolis or Des Moines, from where I grew up. So this was going to be huge. And being drum major of the band, I was literally and figuratively going to have a front row seat to the experience. Both the dignified parts and the less than glamorous parts. And please do feel free to laugh at that photo. It's a ridiculous photo from our newspaper. But anyway, so as you can imagine, when that morning of July 4th rolled around, and I found myself leading the band down Constitution Avenue, past the White House and the Washington Monument, that was a pretty impactful moment. And while I didn't realize it at the time, this was one of those spark moments that set my course towards first being a band director and then into the performance travel field. And it's been a 33-year career so far, I will add, that has led to incredible memories, once-in-a-lifetime experiences, and brought amazing people into my life. And that's really the point. Travel changes lives. It opens doors that may otherwise remain closed. It broadens minds and encourages a wider view. And because of this, your approach to creating these experiences for your student and your ensemble is so critical. It needs to really go beyond, it's our turn to travel this year, or we've always traveled to so-and-so destination. And it begs to ask the deeper questions. So where do we begin? Now, there's a set of 5 questions known as the 5 W's of journalism that are the keys to a good story. And those are, you've probably heard them: who, what, when, where, and why. And when you think about it, what we're creating with these experiences at their heart are really stories, aren't they? So why not ask the same questions? But I've found it makes more sense to ask them in the opposite order. And the big one to answer first is why. Now, on the face of it, that might seem strange, because isn't travel about going somewhere? But if the where doesn't serve the needs of your students, the goals of your program, or your philosophy of teaching, it can range from an exercise in frustration to an actual detriment to your ensemble. But taken with the right approach, it can lead to unimagined growth possibilities. So let's make the where match the why by starting with the clarity of the why. And that's really what this is about: clarity. It's like, I meant to ask, so is this all band folks, or is this a mix of music ed, or what's our makeup of the group roughly?
All band, music ed.
Okay, cool. All right. So you'll relate to this. It's like marching band. Normal people, and let's face it, we're not. Normal people don't understand what we're doing when we stick a feather on our head, put on a heavy uniform, and march around in 30 to 90 degree heat or cold for 12 weeks out of the fall. But when they see the passion and energy and excellence we have for it, they at least understand or appreciate the why. Think of it this way. If you're going to spend a spring break or the beginning of summer or the holidays on a motor coach with 100 kids who are not your own for much of the rest of your life, shouldn't you have a really terrific why to go with that? And too many times over the years, I've heard groups that come to me and the performance aspects kind of get added as an afterthought rather than being the central focus and reason for traveling. Go down to the checklist for a city like New York. We want to see the Statue of Liberty. We want to see Central Park, eat great food in Chinatown, go see a Broadway show, hear the New York Philharmonic, and we list all that. And then we realize, probably should have some kind of performance or workshop in there too. Now, it's not that those other things aren't important. They are. But sometimes we need to shift our thinking and remember to keep music at the center of the experience. Think like a history class going to Gettysburg. It's not because there's a huge outlet mall just outside of town. Or a French club going to Paris. It's not because they use lots of butter in the croissants at Hard Rock Cafe. It's because there's something about those locations that is central to the outcomes that those groups are pursuing. Now that we know we're making the musical why the focus, what are the best ways to reach that why musically? So there's essentially 4 general categories to consider when determining the best music experiences for your ensemble to meet your goals. You've got clinics, working with specialists, university faculty, that type of thing. You've got public performances in theme parks, parades, other attractions. You've got festivals, which can be competitive or collaborative events like mass bands, or a bowl game, or I mentioned the choirs at Carnegie Hall, like I do. And then there's cultural opportunities, things like hearing a major symphony orchestra or seeing a Broadway show. There's pros and cons to all these, and we're going to delve into those a little bit. Honestly, we could devote an entire conversation just to that alone. And there's no good or bad to any of these. They're just all different. And the important thing to remember is this. Look at these in the context of both where you are with your program right now and where you want to go in the future. What fits the needs of your ensemble right now? What's going to make the most productive difference and have the best results now that will begin that longer journey towards future goals? So let's talk a little bit about each one of these. Let's start with clinics. There's pros and cons to all of these, as I said. The pro here is it's an in-depth experience. You're spending time with a real expert who's really going to dig in and help your group. When you're traveling, you don't have to bring concert wear when you're doing a clinic. That kind of makes that side of things sort of easy. They're generally inexpensive. You're hiring somebody for an hour or two of their time. You might have to have a little bit of a fee for a venue, a rehearsal room or something like that. Although usually when you're doing these on university campuses, they're thrilled to have the students come onto their campus because let's face it, it's a great recruiting pitch for them. So generally it's pretty inexpensive that way. And it's what I call safer if you're missing people. Let's say for whatever reason, half your clarinet section or your lead trumpet soloist isn't on the tour. And clinicians kind of understand that's part of the game, it's part of what it is, and they will generally be able to still give you a good experience, even if there's some holes in the ensemble and in the music. You're still going to have a beneficial experience from them. The cons are very few. Biggest one is probably availability. Let's face it, the really good clinicians are the really busy ones. They're the ones that are out every weekend doing honor bands and honor choirs and things like that. And if you've got a mass group that you've put together specifically for the tour, it's not as good maybe as having that group that rehearses together every day. For example, let's say you've got a freshman band and an upper class band, and the trip is whoever out of those 2 ensembles can go. So you might have kind of a weird mix of ability levels, and you're not going to have the people that are always playing together every day. So the ensemble maybe doesn't quite gel as quickly as what it does when you've got that dynamic in there, but it's still going to be a good experience. The clinicians will always still be able to talk about real basic things. Even I remember this as a teacher, even when I think that my band's got a really good handle on a particular basic, there's usually a clinician out there who's going to be able to share something with you that is going to take them even farther down that road into a higher level on that. So very few cons to clinics. There's hardly anything really wrong with doing something like that with your group. All right, let's go to public performances. Here we get into a few more differences. The pros are it's usually the least expensive. Generally, if you're going somewhere like a theme park or an attraction that will allow groups to do this, if you're buying a ticket there, they will pretty much let you perform. There might be some audition things that go with it. But for the most part, they're going to let you do that and not charge you for it, which makes it less expensive with a big caveat. And that caveat, especially for us in instrumental groups, is equipment. Some places, some theme parks might provide all the percussion instruments you need. They might provide chairs and stands. You might just literally be a walk-in, sit down and play type of thing. Or it could be something like performing at one of the monuments in Washington, D.C., where you get a big patch of open space and you have to bring everything you need in. And that might be chairs, stands, equipment, sound equipment, electric piano, go down the list, all sorts of things. So what can seem like an inexpensive option can get very expensive very quickly if you have to do all that. So something to keep in mind. Uh, it's got a good possible audience. You're out in a public area, as long as it's an area that's got good visibility, which is the other thing. Again, are you out in the open where there's going to be lots of traffic, or did they kind of stick you down a hallway and around a corner in a museum somewhere? Some of the cons, because they are free, they tend to generally be outdoor, which puts you at the mercy of Mother Nature, of course. So you want to be aware of that in your planning and be ready for potential contingency plans on that type of thing. There can be distractions and restrictions. I've seen where some museums will literally limit you to a certain decibel level because they don't want the artifacts disturbed. Great story that I share with groups, and this was a lesson that I learned. There was a choir that I was working with from Colorado, fantastic group, and they were one of my clients, and we were doing a trip to Southern California, and we are at a theme park with an outdoor stage, and it's a great stage. They've got huge lighting rigs, they've got incredible sound system. To give you an idea how long ago this was, the newest thing they were doing was they were handling things like sound levels wirelessly on iPads, all right? But it was just a great setting, and the choir itself was very good. They were an accomplished choir and very good at what they do. And so I'm sitting there. I was actually their tour director at the time. So not only had I planned the trip, but I decided to go with them to be the on-site person to kind of help with things. So I'm there sitting, listening to the performance, and they're doing this nice, quiet, kind of meditative piece of music, right? Remember, we're in a theme park. So we're into this real quiet, lush section, and all of a sudden there's a big explosion that I hear a couple blocks away. Well, it was the big stunt show and their big pyrotechnics and fireworks finale, everything kind of exploding at the end sort of thing. A little bit of a distraction, A little further into the piece, then I hear a bunch of laughter and giggling. I look up over about 30 foot on my right, and here's a character greet going on. A bunch of little kids swarming around wanting pictures and autographs and things like that. All normal theme park stuff. Now, it's not that the stage was bad because it was fantastic, and it's not certainly that the choir was bad because they were doing a fantastic job. It was a bad match of the two. Something more upbeat would have been a better set for that, or maybe a different location for the group to perform would have been a better option. So you want to know what you're getting into and how it's going to best help your group shine, in terms of what they do and what their performance is. The audience can be what I call a passive audience. So while you have a possible audience, it might be people who are going to stop and listen to you for a minute or two and then kind of move on with the rest of their day. They're not going to be as engaged as an audience that's there to hear and see specifically what you're doing. And as I mentioned, the logistics can be more complex. Going back to the idea of playing at a monument in Washington, D.C., you might have to be traipsing a lot of stuff. It's a long walk from where the buses park to where you set up at the Lincoln Memorial. So you need to keep that in mind. And it's less self-contained. As I said, you may need to bring a lot of stuff with you. So that's some of the cons of the public performance options. Now, festivals, before we talk about pros and cons, I want to touch on the two different types, because there are kind of two general categories, competitive and collaborative. Competitive, we're all pretty familiar with. You get a panel of experts offering critique. I just finished watching the Bands of America Grand Nationals, live feed yesterday, those types of things. You're going to get comments, maybe a clinic, a workshop with one of the adjudicators, that type of thing. You might get a rating, Division 1, Division 2, Division 3, superior, excellent, that type of thing. You might get a ranking for second, third, fourth place, and you may get both. Collaborative events are the mass ensemble type things. So this is like when you bring your band to perform at a bowl game halftime with 6 other bands in a big mass group. The nice thing about that is you usually get a guest conductor. One of the things our company does, not to plug necessarily, but one of the things our company does is we have a big event down at Disney World that we do at Thanksgiving every year. And your own Barry Hauser has been our guest conductor for that. So it's kind of neat that groups can, you can have an opportunity to bring your entire group to something like that, or a Carnegie Hall event, or any number of things, and give all of your students what almost can equate to an all-state level experience, because you're getting to work with these people who are doing usually these fantastic honor band and honor choir type experiences. And the collaborative things are usually some kind of a landmark event or location. So again, you're playing at the halftime of the Outback Bowl, or you're singing in a mass choir in Carnegie Hall, that sort of thing. So they have pros and cons as well. The biggest pro of them is they tend to be the most self-contained and inclusive. Basically, everything you're going to need is going to be included. Your, percussion equipment, chairs and stands, choir risers, piano, whatever it's going to be. It's all pretty much going to be there for the most part. It's in a better venue. It's in a venue that at least is meant for the type of performance that you're doing, whether that's a football stadium for a band halftime or a concert hall. It's a place where the type of ensemble matches the venue. It definitely covers educational needs, especially if you're getting feedback, if you're getting a workshop of some kind. There's a lot of benefits that come to that, which makes that a much easier sell to your administration, because now it's not just the band going on vacation. You're going to have a real in-depth learning experience and bring some things back that's going to help you become a better group. And you're generally going to have an appreciative audience because you've got people involved with that festival, whether it's other groups, your adjudicators, whoever it is, who are there specifically to hear and see your performance. And these can be what I call resume builders. I have a lot of directors that'll ask me, I want to be in the Macy's parade someday. How do I get to that? Well, you start by doing small parades and small festivals and events along the way. As I like to say, the road to Macy's goes through the Rhubarb Festival that's 2 counties over. It's those types of things that you need to do and get your group out there and performing and getting to bigger and bigger things. Doing those small parades leads to maybe doing a parade in Chicago, leads to maybe doing a bowl game event, which leads to Macy's types of things. So these are important things to do along that line as well. Gives your group visibility, certainly helps with community support as well. Now, some of the cons. They can be the most expensive because they are inclusive. They've got all the stuff you need, or you're performing in a place like Carnegie Hall, which is not inexpensive. They do tend to be the most costly options that are out there. If it's a competitive festival, you want to know going in that competition can be unpredictable. I know there were weekends when I was working with a festival company. There were weekends where we would have 20 groups show up. There were weekends when we would have 3 groups show up. And it just depends on how many decide to go on any given weekend. So if that's important, you want to know that going in. And while you've got that appreciative audience, it may be a limited one. It might just be your chaperones and the 3 adjudicators who are giving you the feedback. I always encourage groups when they're going to a festival to go and listen to the other groups, because one of the best things you can do for your high school students is have them hear other high school students perform, both the good and bad parts of it. So I encourage you to do that. It's always very, very good for as a musician to have that listening skill there. And you do want to keep in mind how, quote unquote, special is that special invitation. And you will get these in the mail. And there will be ones that are very legitimate, but there will be ones, I remember getting the ones, I'd go down to my mailbox and I'd find a letter and it would say, "Congratulations, you've been invited to perform in Carnegie Hall." And I'm thinking, you probably just weren't sitting in on that rehearsal we finished, were you? So, I guess the metric that I use is keep your eyes open. If the conversation about one of those events leans more towards adding activities, upgrading to a nice hotel, doing those types of things, it may be more of a thing about your travel dollars than the actual musical experience. So just be aware, be watchful for those kind of things. But there are good and bad invitations out there too. All right, finally, cultural opportunities. And honestly, there's no cons to any of these. They are all very good. So I really wanted to give you just some examples. It's things like Broadway shows, going to hear a professional symphony or a professional choir concert, going to a university concert. We know there's amazing university groups like what you have at University of Illinois. It's great for high school groups to come hear them too. Military ensembles, if you happen to be in Washington, D.C., there's a great resource right there. One of the best things I did with one of my groups when we traveled was we went to the Friday Night Marine Tattoo at the barracks, where they had the drum corps and the band and the silent drill team. It was funny because the kids all complained because I was going to make them go to a concert on the trip, which was supposed to be fun. That ended up being the thing they talked about the most. So the kids will surprise you sometimes. Stick with it and put those kind of opportunities in there. Going to jazz club venues, we got some great ones up here in Chicago. And even dinner theaters and regional theaters can be great experiences too. But what we're seeing right now, coming out of the blip of the past 2 years, we've seen a lot more groups focusing on clinics and culture. Some not even, bringing their instruments on the tours, but just going to go hear ensembles, and they go to Broadway shows and they go do things like that. And it makes complete sense as programs are getting their footing again and beginning to rebuild. A perfect example of where are we now and where do we want to go to? So let's continue talking about the why. There's another why that's often a throwaway that we have always said but never really thought much about, but it's a very real thing, and that is group bonding. Conductor Cynthia Johnston Turner, she was at University of Georgia for a while. She did her master's thesis on this, and it's brilliant. One year, her advanced wind ensemble was performing at a higher level than ever before, and she was curious, what was the root cause? And after some introspection, doing a lot of interviews with the students, the answer became quite clear. It was the skill sets and the personal growth that came to the surface during the preparation for and experience of an extended performance tour they did that year. It's qualities like leadership, personal responsibility, working together, resolving conflicts, trust in yourself, trust in those around you. And it all transferred from the bus into the rehearsal room. And what an incredible collateral benefit for your students in your program. All right, we've talked a lot about why. Let's go to where. Now that we've figured out what the why is, let's get to the fun part, right? This is where you get to dream. This is about riding the biggest new roller coaster attraction, sitting in the orchestra hall audience, watching your students' faces the first time they see the Statue of Liberty. This is where we start painting the picture for the group. But it's really less about art and more about math, believe it or not. So since we've made where equal why, let's go to the next rule, which is balance the equation. There's going to be multiple facets to your program, and all going on at once that all influence each other. And a lot of them are financial in nature. Purchasing uniforms, repairing and replacing equipment, hiring arrangers and drill writers, building your music library, and travel costs. They're all in there. And the groups that struggle are often the ones that bite off more than they can chew. You want to make sure you're building your travel goals into a multi-year plan that aligns with your plans for all the other major purchases you're going to need to make in the lifetime of your program. I remember I had a client years ago. First year I worked with them, we did a trip to Hawaii. And the very next year they turned around and they went and wanted to do a cruise. And then the very next year they wanted to go do a tour in New York City. And every year the director complained to me about having to pay for all these expensive trips. Now, kind of the easy solution would be maybe don't do a big trip like that every single year. So pace yourself, and what that means in real terms kind of leads to our next equation, which is big doesn't equal distance. I hear that phrase a lot. It's our big trip year. And what usually follows is it's our turn to spend a lot of money to go somewhere far away. Now, what if we consider reframing that and make it a big experience tour? Think about what you could do with less resources and time spent actually getting somewhere and more time spent doing something amazing at that location. Things that, while Chicago seems close, there's things that groups aren't going to do on a family trip to Chicago that you can do with your ensemble. Think in those terms. With the current realities of fuel costs, especially, and with a lot of motor coach companies moving away from doing those lovely overnight 25-hour drives. How many of you did those when you were in high school? Yeah, right? Yeah. But they're reducing or eliminating those due to both combination of safety and actual staffing concerns coming out of the pandemic. A new approach to travel traditions might actually become a necessity. So be thinking about that. It's important as well to not get hung up on one particular destination being the end all be all, because what's there might not match your why. I love Orlando. It's great. I love going to Orlando. I love going to the parks. But if your goal is hearing a top-notch orchestra, that location might not be your best pick. And additionally, don't get locked into the idea that your tour might be the only opportunity these particular kids might have to experience something like this. You can't possibly know that for certain. So don't make that part of the equation. It's a noble thought, but you don't know that that's going to be the case. what you want to do is whet their appetite for something bigger down the road in their lives. And finally, value does not equal cheapest. Don't fall into the low bid trap. Think in terms of the best value and not what's cheapest. Those are two vastly different qualities, and value is the measure of quality and not price tag. And while you may choose to or be required to seek multiple options by your school, and that's fine, it's a good thing to do, the reality is apples to apples doesn't exist in performance travel. No two bids are ever going to be exactly the same. The unfortunate part is that school boards and parent organizations will have a tendency to jump to the bottom line figure and make decisions based upon that factor. That's why you, as the director, have to dig deeper for the details and paint that fuller picture. Are those show tickets, for example, are they going to be orchestra level or are they going to be nosebleed balcony seats? Is that dinner that's included a 4-course steakhouse meal or is it a voucher for burger and fries? Is the choice that's being made in all these things going to be one that is memorable or one that leaves you feeling like it could have been more? Very important stuff to think about. Now that we've adjusted the big picture and we have our where, the next focus is on timing, on when in relation to the planning process. It would be terrific if your principal would say to you, sure, take the band on tour whenever you want, whenever it's most convenient for you. I can absolutely assure you it is not that way in the real world. More often than not, the when of travel dates is usually dictated for you by school calendar and other factors. You got to hit that sweet spot between athletic seasons and between the standardized testing date ranges and then our own departmental schedules that we pack full of stuff. The great news is while we can't necessarily control the calendar, we can control the planning process. So the first and most important part to know is that earlier is always better. While the planning start time for large and small scale tours can vary, the general rule is at least 1 year for domestic tours and 2 years for international. But we're even seeing groups that are planning domestic tours 18 months in advance, and that's a smart thing. I've been working with a lot of groups already working on 2024 trips, if you can believe that. Earlier is always better for lots of reasons. If you need to do more fundraising for the tour, it stands to reason that you're going to need more time for fundraising events and projects. So you need to take into account how time-specific fundraisers factor in. When do you see the results of that annual holiday magical dinner or the winter citrus fruit sales or the sports concession stand operations? And it's good to allow some time for that last minute fill-in fundraiser that you might have to have just in case. Let's not forget the tremendous recruitment advantage of going to your feeder school to talk with those 8th graders before they register for classes in the fall. You go tell them about all the amazing things they get to do in the high school ensemble, one of which might include that tour scheduled for next year. I have a lot of directors who wait until the fall to unveil their tour. They say, we want to wait till everybody's under our roof and all together. But they're missing a tremendous opportunity to combat that attrition that we all know happens going from middle school to high school. I can tell you as somebody who had a high school freshman about 4 or 5 years ago, that you get hit with so much stuff in that first month of that freshman year, things that fees you have to pay and opportunities are out there and things like that. At some point that wall goes up and you kind of say, enough, we're not taking on anything else this year. Get to the kids before that happens. Talk to them in the spring. You'll have a much higher success rate for your tours by doing that than waiting. And finally, having some more time to plan gives you more time in case a plan B is needed. Sometimes you get surprised by a student interested in a particular location, and not always in a good way. Sometimes conditions beyond your control change that make that large-scale tour unsustainable for that year. And in those situations, often the wise choice is to scale back rather than push forward anyway, because the result is usually a tour that either limits the number of participants who have the ability to travel, or a tour where the quality of the content has had to be comprised simply to make it possible. Either case is going to end with disappointment. All right, we've talked about a lot of these things. Another fun part is the what. Next we come to what do we get to put on the itinerary. And here's where I personally like to suggest challenges to a lot of the concepts that are out there. The first one being, the idea that we need to make the trip fun for the kids. They don't need to be entertained every moment. It doesn't need to be all thrill rides. And the more it looks like a vacation, the harder it might be to justify to administration. And yes, you want to have a variety of activities, and not all of them need to be serious and educational. But if you've ever really watched a group on tour, what you see is that having a good balance of what you're doing and having the time they get to spend together in a new place, seeing new things and having new adventures, that's what makes the fun. Now, in order to achieve it, it's important that you don't overload the schedule. And this kind of challenges the notion of keeping them busy during the day so they don't cause trouble at night. We've all heard that excuse, right? Taping the doors in the hotel, that kind of thing. Yeah. View it from the flip side. I've seen groups so exhausted from constant running that they don't have the energy to appreciate what they're experiencing. I'll give a perfect example. I went to the British Museum once. I was jet lagged. I don't remember a thing about it. And it was the British Museum. It's especially important to remember where clinics or your performances while on tour are concerned. I've watched students, when I was at the Carnegie group, I watched students nodding off working with these amazing conductors and educators. And it's because a city like New York absolutely exhausts you. I watched my own group on an Orlando trip napping right before we went on stage at a festival, after 4 days in the theme parks. There was a big lesson learned. Don't run the risk of jeopardizing the why, everything that's gone into this, behind this whole experience by running the group ragged. Pacing's so important. And while we've talked about keeping a focus on the music, and that still needs to be your primary why, there's absolutely value to taking a cross-curricular approach whenever possible. One thing you're going to find out real fast is that the other teachers really don't appreciate it so much when you pull students out of their classes for several days. They just don't. But what if you're able to say to the art teacher, we're going to go visit the Art Institute of Chicago. Or you go tell the science teacher, we're visiting the Field Museum, we're going to see Sue the T-Rex. That's an incredible way to gain some allies and make this an experience that's going to benefit their classrooms as well as yours. And finally, I really highly encourage you to stick to the genuine experiences that are unique to the location you're visiting, because that's what makes the destination special and memorable. We all know the tourism tourist trap, right? Those attractions that it's the same content no matter what city they're dropped into. I'm a foodie, so I kind of look at it this way. This is the comparison I make. If I'm in Chicago, I'm going to go get deep dish pizza. And my opinion is Giordano's is the best, but that could be another whole conversation. If I'm going to Boston, I'm going to go get clam chowder. I'm going to eat seafood until I can't stand it anymore. If I'm in Texas, I'm going to go find the best smoked brisket there is in town. I'm less inclined in all these places to eat fried chicken sitting in an arena with 2,000 people watching guys who look like Eric Whitacre joust. I think you all know what I'm talking about there. It's a personal choice, but I think you see my point too. So, to show off my geek and the friends of our old friend Admiral Akbar, it's a trap, and know it when you see it. So, all right. Let's get to who, finally. Who can help you plan this? And to answer this, we actually need to jump back to why for a minute and ask the question, why is a travel planner important anyway? And there's multiple reasons. First and foremost, as a music educator, you wear a number of hats, and more get added to that hat rack in the corner of your office every year. By necessity, you don't have or you need to have the background in a lot of areas, but travel planning is not one of them. You don't need to wear this hat as well. Your focus needs to be on your students, your program, and the skills that only you can bring to them that no one else can. And finally, because you need an advocate working on your behalf when things get challenging. When you're at the airport or on the beach and the crew from the Weather Channel shows up, you don't want to be the one who has to solve whatever is coming next. I have yet to hear a music teacher say, boy, I wish I had the chance to work on getting refunds from all those hotels and airlines and attractions in the spring of 2020. That would have been so much fun. Guarantee you it was not fun for us in the industry. But travel planners have that experience. They have the industry relationships and the liability protections that you don't have. And all those things work to the benefit of you and your students. So before we talk about who can help you with this, let's also first discuss who should not help you. The travel agents who are in town, who plan family trips to Disneyland, honeymoons to Cancun, or senior citizen trips to watch the leaves change in the fall, are all very good at what they do. But performance group travel is a vastly different animal, and one skill set does not transfer to the other. And while you may receive pressure to keep the business local, you'll hear that, I would ask whether that same rule applies when purchasing music, uniforms, and much of your equipment and instruments. I sure hope you're not buying your contrabass clarinets at Home Depot, even though they look sometimes like they could be. Additionally, you're going to have a parent who's going to happily volunteer to take on this project. They're going to say, oh, it'll be fun. They love doing this kind of thing. They'll save the group lots of money. This is one of those things that might work really well until it doesn't. And when it doesn't in a big way, with lots of money and probably no small amount of anger and frustration involved as well. Don't hire a parent you might have to fire. Trust me, if you've got someone with that kind of energy, put them in charge of your uniform inventory or your music library. You'll be a lot better served that way. So, who do you look for to find the right who for you? And first and foremost, they've got to have experience planning performance tours with music groups. It's critical because of the vast amount of details unique to music ensembles. Just like with our Cancun honeymoon planners, these are vastly different from 8th grade trips to Washington, D.C. and foreign language trips to Europe. Knowing what is inherently needed helps avoid pitfalls that can happen due to lack of familiarity with what makes a music tour go successfully. Talk with your friends, your colleagues, your mentors. Find out who they've worked with for your tour plans. Who they have a great experience with? Who did they have a bad experience with? Or who are they working with, but something went really poorly on the tour and they fixed it tremendously? Sometimes that last one can be the sign of a company that's got the best client care. Interview the company. Find out whether they align with your goals and your philosophy. You go into a music education conference, whether it's IMEC or Midwest or wherever you might go. It's a perfect way to do that. Spend some time talking with them and the consultant who's going to be doing your planning. Is this someone you feel you're going to be compatible with over the course of several months and maybe years? Is there a little bit of a chemistry and trust level present? All very important. Now, here in Chicago, improv comedy is a big thing. And what makes improv great is when people play the yes and game, where one person introduces an idea and the next person says yes and, building upon that initial concept and taking it to a new level. Find your yes and person, someone who can take the ideas and concepts you have and introduce a next level to the plans, someone who can best advise you on the where and the what. You want a collaborator who might give you food for thought to challenge your initial concepts, rather than just simply an order taker who listens to your list and puts them on a piece of paper as an itinerary. It needs to be a collaborative relationship. And finally, there's a remarkable organization called the Student and Youth Travel Association, or SITA. Their membership consists of both travel planners who are held to a high standard of quality and business ethics, and then attractions, hotels, and restaurants that cater to the specific needs and interests of student groups. Membership in SITA is a good sign that you're going to be well cared for in your tour plans. So their members can be found on their website. Just go to their website. You can find a membership list for every state in the country there. And when you find your who, I'm going to share this with you. Here's the secrets to you being the best client ever. First of all, communication with your travel planner, reading your emails and responding to the questions within them in a timely manner is the key to the success of your group's experiences. In short, just please read and answer your emails. Going into radio silence, not responding to emails or phone calls, it only reflects poorly on you. And that extends to the bid process, where you might be talking with multiple companies and have yet to decide on a partner for a particular venture. Please don't be that director. Feedback following a tour or a bid process, whether it's good or bad, is always helpful and appreciated, and it takes the mystery out of the minds of many. To put it in some context, imagine, you're a band director now. Imagine performing your best and getting a 3 at contest with no comments or scoring from the panel, no idea why you didn't succeed or how to improve. Trust me, that is how this feels. So in short, don't ghost. Just make sure you stay in contact with people. Now, let's talk about a little bit about what the past 2 years have brought to us here. Events like 9/11, COVID-19, and I've been at this long enough that I saw both of those things happen, taught us all a lot about a lot of different things. And kind of the central premise that I have come back to goes back to, I'm about to date myself again here, goes back to an early 1980s sci-fi book series called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Anybody out there read it? Awesome. All right. It's a great humorous read. If you haven't read it, I suggest you do it. But one of the central themes through the book series was simply this: don't panic. And it really is relevant to what happens when you're planning travel and maybe things go wrong. The first and most important thing, as I said, is you don't want to shut down. Stay in contact with your provider. They're there to help you, and they can't help you if you're not communicating. It's human nature. We kind of want to just curl up in a ball and hide in a closet somewhere. It's really the last thing you can do. You need to be out there present and working on a solution. Because that situation is going to evolve, and it's probably going to evolve quickly and constantly, which is, again, another good reason to not shut down. And there's always going to be so much that will depend on the situation. There's times when there's not going to be any immediate black and white answers. And that gets hard because parents and administrators especially, they want to know, well, what's going to happen if? What's going to happen if? And there may not be answers for something that is completely unpredictable. And the COVID-19 outbreak is a perfect example of that. I can tell you how when things first started, for example, the first reaction was, okay, this is going to blow over in a couple of weeks. And the vendors would tell us, we're not going to give any money back, just reschedule things. And then after a few days, we could tell, all right, it's going to be a bit longer than that. We're going to give you a credit to use to the end of the year. And then it became, holy cow, we're going to be here a little bit. Here's all your money back type of thing. And had we gone with the first reaction, in the first premise of where things were, it was a vastly different answer than we got in the space of maybe a couple of weeks later. So, having that patience to let that process work itself out can be very, very important in an emergency situation. And it's hard to do because people want to know answers right away. But sometimes take a step back, take a breath, and see how things play out. And presuming that you've done your research, you've gone to the site or website, you've chosen wisely, your travel planner is not out to get you or take advantage of the situation. If I've learned anything about this industry, it's that by far, it's a very collaborative group of people who are there to do the right thing. Yes, there's absolutely going to be bad eggs. There is in any industry, but they are very few and far between. And the links that people in the industry went to solve problems during COVID was something I'd never seen before. It was amazing. Travel insurance has become the new normal. More of that has been purchased the past year and a half than I've seen in the previous 20 years I've been doing this. It's important to know the different kinds that are out there. You want to look for ones that have something usually referred to as a cancel for any reason policy, or CFAR, it's sometimes called. That gives you a lot more flexibility and money back if someone has to cancel. So you want to look for those types of things. Additionally, as I mentioned, patience is not a virtue, it is kind of the virtue. A good travel company is going to be working on your behalf. Sometimes the best results take more time, and it's just a matter of keeping your parents, your administration patient while those processes work out. By the contract might not be the only answer if you take that time to negotiate. And the thing to remember is ultimately we're all in this together. The travel companies are there to do what's best for you and for themselves. They're looking for a win-win. in any kind of bad situation, because that's how they survive and that's how they keep serving your students. And that's how your students keep getting amazing opportunities. And for the one of you that's read the book, always know where your towel is. All right. So in the end, it all comes back to the life-changing opportunities a performance tour can provide. And this photo still hangs over my desk. In fact, I'm looking at it right now. And it reminds me of how important these performance travel experiences are. I can definitively tell you who in that photo had their life changed by the experience. It's the guy in the white uniform in the front row with the bad 80s haircut. His life was never the same after that July 4th in Washington, D.C. Who's it going to be in your group's photo? All right.